All right. So, and I'm going to mute all as well, but of course, feel free to unmute at any time. Also, excuse my informal dress. After this class, I'm hoping to put my sukkah together at my home. So that's why I'm dressed down. I'm also the only one in the building today. But Jerry will be in this afternoon after he picks up the Lulavim and Etrogim for those who ordered. What I wanted to look at today for our Torah study is what the Torah portion is this Shabbat and also Sunday. So even though it's Shabbat, it is Sukkot. So when the holiday coincides with Shabbat, we depart from the regular weekly Shabbat Torah readings and have instead a holiday reading, right? So the Torah reading cycle is twofold. There are Torah readings that are read on holidays and fast days, and then there are Torah readings that are read on Shabbat, which then also means that that same portion is read on Shabbat afternoon, Monday, and Thursday. So every week, if you get a formal invitation to a wedding or a bar mitzvah, it will say in the Hebrew what the Torah portion is. And traditionally, we kind of ascertain the date based on, it'll say the event is taking place on Monday during the week of the portion such and such. So that's a traditional way to kind of say what day of the week the event is taking place. So the portion leads up to Shabbat morning, and then Shabbat afternoon, you start with the next week's portion. So Shabbat afternoon, Monday and Thursday, essentially we're reading the first aliyah of the next Shabbat portion divided into three parts. Okay, so Monday and Thursday are Torah reading days because those were market days back in ancient times, days on which there'd be more people than usual in synagogue, and an appropriate time then to take the Torah out of the ark. Out of respect to the Torah, if there are a lot of people in shul, then you take the Torah out of the ark and read from it. So it's just a small taste of what that full Shabbat portion is going to be. So that's how the Torah reading cycle works. So right now, for example, this tomorrow morning service, what would be the Torah reading that we read since this coming Shabbat is not the regular weekly cycle of Torah readings, right? We're reading a special reading for Sukkot. So tomorrow we don't read a little bit of that portion from Sukkot. Instead, we're thinking about, what's the next cycle of reading? We read from the very last portion in the Torah, Vizot HaBracha, which is read on Simchat Torah. So sometimes it gets a little complicated when a holiday intervenes in the midst of the weekly Shabbat Torah reading cycle, but knowing what the Torah reading is helps us understand where we are in the calendar. Okay, so I just wanted to have that bit of digression. So the Torah reading for Sukkot, both the first and the second day of Sukkot, is taken from the book of Leviticus, chapter 22, beginning with verse 26. So if you have the Eitz Chaim, we turn to page 723. If you have a different edition of the Chumash, you could look in the table of contents for the portion Emor and turn there and look, flip to the midst of the third aliyah. But it's Leviticus 22, beginning with verse 26. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I say that this is the reading for the first and the second day of Sukkot, because we have to remember that in Israel, as the Torah teaches us, which we'll see momentarily, in Israel, there's only one day of Yom Tov, as opposed to 2 days of Yom Tov at the beginning of the holiday, and one day of Yom Tov at the end, as opposed to 2 days of Yom Tov at the end. So that just as a reminder, this gets to a bit of Jewish history, and also highlighting the place of diaspora Jewish community and its relationship to the land of Israel. So always throughout rabbinic literature, the land of Israel, also based on the Torah and the Bible, the land of Israel is primary to and holier than any other land in the world. So the land of Israel then has certain laws that are, especially agricultural laws, that only observed in the land of Israel, reflecting its holiness. So in ancient times, before the internet, the way that people knew what was going on and how news would be sent from one community to the other would be bonfires that would be lit on the top of hills and mountains. So when the new month was officially announced in the temple in Jerusalem, signal fires then would be lit throughout the land of Israel and then onto the diaspora to let them know that the new month has been announced. But it took a while for those signal fires to get from one mountain to the next. And by the time the news got to outside of Israel, the question could be, well, what does this fire mean? Does it mean now that it's today is Rosh Chodesh? Or by the time the fire got there, it was yesterday? So because of that, now today, again, we know the Jewish calendar. You can just go to hebcal.com and you can plug in any date and know what the Jewish date is, the Jewish equivalent date for that date is. So we know what the Jewish calendar is. And the rabbis knew the Jewish calendar, even if they were relying on witnesses to come to say when the new moon was seen in the sky. The rabbis knew the astronomical formula, and they knew when the new moon would be. The figuring that out when the new moon would be, Babylonian astronomers, Greek and Roman astronomers figured that out. And but the rabbis, because they said you need witnesses to come to the temple to attest to the new moon, insisted on doing that. It wasn't until around the 300s that finally the rabbis agreed, we'll go with the astronomical formula and not rely on witnesses anymore, because there's no temple anymore. And we're not relying on the rabbis in the land of Israel to determine the calendar either. But they are still saying we're going to differentiate between the Jewish community in Israel and Jewish community outside of Israel, even if we have the formula and everybody could be doing the holiday the same day. We're going to say if you're outside of Israel, we're adding an extra day of Yom Tov, just to say we're in exile. We're outside of Israel. And if we move to Israel, then we'll be privileged to observe the holiday as it was originally meant from the Torah, one day at the beginning, one day at the end. Okay, so the Torah reading, again, page 723 in the Eitz Chaim, beginning with Leviticus 22, verse 26. I'm just going to read through it. We'll see how far we get. And we'll look every now and then down below if a question arises. And again, feel free to interrupt with any question or comment as we go. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moses saying, Shor o chesev o ez, ki yivaled. So when an ox or a sheep or a goat gives birth, vehaya shivat yamim tachat imo, and that newborn ox, sheep, or goat is 7 days old, okay? It's been with its mother for 7 days, literally under its mother, but more understood, I guess, under its mother in terms of feeding, right? The udder for the ox, sheep, or goat hangs down from the belly, and the baby ox, sheep, or goat would be reaching up with its head to suck on the udder. So it literally would be under its mother. So you let the baby ox, sheep, or goat be with its mother for 7 days. Umiyom hashmini vahala yeratzeh lekorban ishel Adonai. From the 8th day on, it's available as a sacrifice, a burnt offering to God. Okay, so that's the rule. Baby animals are fit for sacrifice once they are 8 days old and older. Okay? V'shor oseh oto v'et beno lo tishchatu biyom echad. But an ox or a sheep, it and its child should not be sacrificed, should not be slaughtered on the same day. Okay? So why? We don't know. And so there is below the line commentary, there is no distinction between the suffering of a human being and that of a beast, excuse me, in this respect. Since feelings of maternal affection belong not to the intellectual faculty, but to the emotional faculty, which is common to humans and animals alike. Recent research seems to indicate that animals do indeed have such feelings. Other scholars claim that the primary concern of the law is not with the animal's feelings, but with the cultivation of kindness and compassion in the heart of the human being. It's not because God pities the animal, but in order that the people of Israel should not practice cruel habits. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Just want to finish this paragraph and start the next one to try to understand what this paragraph is doing here for a holiday Torah reading. Okay, so we have the rule: baby animals cannot be slaughtered until they're at least 8 days old, and parent and child animal cannot be slaughtered on the same day. V'chi tizbechu zevach todah l'Adonai lirtzonchem tizbachu. When you offer a free will offering, or a Thanksgiving offering, when you sacrifice a Thanksgiving offering to l'Adonai, to God, lirtzonchem tizbachu, it sacrifice it so that it may be acceptable in your favor. Lirtzonchem tizbachu. It should be for your own. It should be for your own free will that you're doing it, right? You shouldn't be forced into offering a Thanksgiving offering. I think it means it should be offered because you really want to do it. Lirtzonchem. It should be for your will. It's like some prayers begin Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will that this prayer be accepted. So Lirtzonchem, it should be your will. That, in other words, it should be our idea, and it should be our no compulsion upon us to force us to offer this. 30, Bayom hahu yeachel lo totiru mimenu ad boker ani Adonai. On that day it should be eaten, right? So when you offer the Thanksgiving offering, don't store it away after you offered it, right? Some of it has to be burnt on the altar. Some of it could be given to the Kohen or the Levi, but and some of it, the person offering it gets to eat part of it. So that part that's for the average Israelite to be able to consume has to be consumed on that day. Don't leave it over until the morning. Okay, so when you're offering a Thanksgiving sacrifice, come hungry. Okay, Ani Adonai. This is the word of God. I am God. 31. Ushmartem mitzvotai va'asitem otam. Observe my commandments and do them. Ani Adonai. I am God. Velo techalalu et shem kodshi. Don't desecrate my holy name. V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. I should be sanctified amongst the people of Israel. Ani Adonai mekadishchem. I am God who sanctifies you. Hamotzi etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. Continuing this idea, I am the God who made you holy, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Liot lachem le'Elohim, to be your God. Ani Adonai, I am God. Okay, so this is the introduction. And on Shabbat, that's when the first Aliyah ends. On a holiday, so there are 7 Aliyot on Shabbat, 5 Aliyot on a weekday when a holiday occurs on a weekday. So this year, first day of Sukkot is a Shabbat, so 7 Aliyot. This very same portion is read on Sunday, second day. Sunday is considered a weekday, so instead of being divided into 7, it's divided into 5. And then this first Aliyah doesn't end here, it would end a few verses later. So the law about the animal needing to be 8 days old to be sacrificed. When you offer a Thanksgiving offering, it needs to be eaten that day. And observe my commandments. Don't desecrate God's name. Remember that God made you holy and that God brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Okay, so this is the introduction, and then now let's just read the first couple of sentences and then talk a little bit about why this section needs this introduction, like why we read this introductory passage on the holiday. So chapter 23, verse 1, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moses saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael va'amarta alehem, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, Moadei Adonai, asher tikru'u otam mikra'e kodesh, elehem moadai. The sacred occasions of God. So a moed can be a holiday, but it's technically speaking, it's a day that is designated as a holy day. Okay, so as opposed to an average workday or weekday, a moed is a designated holy day. Okay, so the intermediate days, right? Sukkot is 8 days long. Passover is 8 days long. The last two are Yom Tov, holy days. The rest of the days between the first two and last two, those 4 days, are considered Chol HaMoed, the weekdays of the Moed, the weekdays of the holiday. Okay, so Moed can be holiday, but technically it's a sacred occasion designated as such. So the sacred occasions of God that you proclaim as holy days, as holy proclamations, these are my holy days. So it's interesting. The wording is a little bit complicated and awkward. It seems as if there's a partnership going on here. God is determining what the holy days are, but we are proclaiming them. So why are we proclaiming holy days? God seems to be proclaiming the holy days, right? God is commanding Moses to teach the people about the holy days, but also to say to them to proclaim them. All right, so I just want to say about this, Jules, do you have a question? Do you have a question, Jules? No. Okay. So the rabbis took advantage of this awkward wording by saying, this verse is giving us rabbis the authority to determine how these holidays are going to be proclaimed and how they are going to be observed, right? So that, in other words, we have the authority, the rabbis say, to say that we need witnesses to come to the temple to attest that, to testify that they saw the new moon. So that gives the rabbis the authority to then say when the new month starts, right? We're not waiting for God to send word, this is the new month. This verse says we work in partnership with God in determining when the holidays are to be observed. And we'll get to this when we get to how the holiday of Shavuot is to be observed. That's when really the whole process of the rabbis getting involved in setting the calendar. So the fact that it says Asher Tikra'u Otam, that you plural, would proclaim them. Okay, it's not God proclaiming them, it's the people proclaiming them. So we're working in partnership with God in proclaiming these holidays. Now the question is, if this would be a good start to the section if we're reading this on the holidays, which we are, why not start with here? Why do we have to start a few verses before with the sacrifices? So I think the idea is that on some of these holidays, the people do get to consume some of the sacrifices or parts of the sacrifices that are offered, right? So when we come to the temple in Jerusalem, when it was standing for the pilgrimage festivals, we're not coming empty-handed. On Passover, we're coming with a paschal lamb. On Shavuot, we're coming with the first fruits. On Sukkot, we're coming with the fall harvest. So we're offering that to God. Do we get to consume some of that? It depends. The paschal sacrifice, absolutely. The other sacrifices, it's unclear if the people get to consume some of it. But if they do get to consume it, right, I'm not up on all the laws of when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, what the Israelites could consume and what only Kohanim and Leviim could consume. So the idea is that if we're bringing something with us to offer, and maybe we don't have first fruits or fall harvest, maybe instead we're bringing an animal as the offering for the holiday. Here's the rule then of what to bring. Okay, so if you're going to come and you're going to bring something, make sure it follows this basic rule. Okay, don't bring a parent and child animal to be offered on the same day, and make sure the child animal is at least 8 days old when you come. Okay, so that when you're coming, remember, it's not about you. You're doing this in order to recognize that you're part of creation, and that creation is working together in partnership in order to glorify God. So don't be no, I'll say it in the positive. Be compassionate when you come to the temple in Jerusalem to offer these offerings. Consider the other animals and creatures that you are bringing, and don't desecrate God's name in this process of observing the holiday. Or it's meant here in Emor to be teaching more broadly about not desecrating God's name all the time, but specifically here about the holiday. You don't want to desecrate the God's name in how we're observing the holiday. Don't have an orgy. Don't destroy nature in order to observe the holiday. Don't take advantage of other people. In other words, be holy yourselves in the way that you are observing the holiday. So I think that that's why this section is introduced. It's interesting that in the Reform community, the reading for the holiday doesn't begin with this section about the sacrifice, because the Reform movement is anti-sacrifice and anti having to do with any kind of reference to the sacrificial past. So that's a major difference in the prayer book of the Reform movement versus our prayer book. That if you go to a Reform synagogue and look at their prayer book, you will see no reference to sacrifice in it. You'll have reference instead to prayer and love and compassion and social justice and things like that. So I think the issue for me with that is I'm not saying the Reform movement is wrong. I only mean to say that by omitting that part of our past, we lose out on an opportunity to reinterpret the past. Okay, so I'm not saying that we keep the sacrifice here to hope for the day that we have sacrifices again. I'm not saying that. I do pray, like the prayers say, for the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, but I'm not really looking forward to sacrifices being offered there again. I am looking forward to the centrality that the temple can provide to the Jewish community, okay, and that the sense of holiness and sanctity that the temple can provide. So the sacrifice here, I'm not concerned about this law of not sacrificing a mother and child animal on this, or a parent and child animal on the same day. I don't really care about that detail. I do care about the idea that we're being compassionate towards other creatures, and that compassion, we have to remember that when we're observing the holiday, right? So the holiday is not about a narcissistic, hedonistic celebration. It's being at one with nature. Okay. So verse.
I just have a curiosity question. Do you happen to know if the Reconstructionist movement follows the Reform movement on that?
I think it does. I mean, I do have a Reconstructionist prayer book here. I don't have, so I think
that's fine if you don't know. That's fine.
yes. I just want to. I'll try to look quickly to see if I can see the Amida and how the Musafs, what it does about Musaf. Just a second. So it doesn't, the Reconstructionist prayer book doesn't have mincha in it, which is interesting.
Oh, they have a weekday book, so it's probably in there. But
this is a Kol HaNeshama for Shabbat and Hanukkah.
Oh, it would be on Shabbat as well, right? Yeah.
So there's no Musaf here as an option for, so that they agree that the whole idea of doing Musaf is to remember the additional Musaf, the additional sacrifice that was offered.
Right. So, yeah, they don't do that at all.
Right. So Shacharit, well, you could argue that we shouldn't do Shacharit either. In other words, why do we have prayer? We have prayer as a direct substitute for the sacrifices that were offered. Okay, we have the morning service to remember the morning sacrifice, the regular morning sacrifice, besides all the other sacrifices that people would be bringing. We have mincha because of a regular meal offering that was offered in the afternoon, besides other sacrifices that would be offered. And the evening, we have the evening service to remember that the fire was kept burning on the altar. So if prayer is a direct substitute for that and a direct reference to all of that, then we shouldn't pray at all with that argument of the Reform movement saying we don't want to have references to sacrifices. But the Reform movement would argue, well, we also pray morning, afternoon, and evening to remember that Abraham got up early in the morning to answer God's call to bring Isaac to the mountain. And we have the afternoon service to remember how Isaac was meditating in the field in the afternoon. And we have the evening service because of Jacob's dream of the ladder with the angels going up and down that he had at night. So yeah, so for the Reform movement, that's the reason why we pray, to remember the patriarchs and their communication with God. Okay, so so all I'm saying is you're already playing with interpretation, and the conservative movement plays with the interpretation too. So it's all a matter of how much you're willing to play and bend the system, right? So we keep so the Reform movement doesn't do Musaf, because for them that's the direct substitute for the sacrifice. Okay, we do Musaf, but instead of saying in the traditional prayer book where it says in the Musaf Amida, where we hope to Naaseh v'nakriv, we will do and we will offer this sacrifice again. The conservative movement changes it to the past tense. We remember how we did and offered this Musaf sacrifice. Okay, so that's how we reconcile having Musaf, having sacrifice, remember the sacrificial past, but saying we're not looking forward to sacrifices in the future. So that's just how we do it. All right, in the Orthodox world, they keep it, right? And they keep the reference every day to the fires of Israel. That's in the Amida every day, which in the conservative movement, we don't have the fires of Israel there. But if you're a careful reader of the Machzor, it's there as an option in our Lev Shalem Machzor. It's not in the Lev Shalem Sidur, but it's in Lev Shalem Machzor. Anyway, I went far afield here about sacrifices, but I think it's just an understanding. We don't have it here necessarily to say we'll look forward to bring these sacrifices again. I'm reading this as saying when we celebrate our holidays, we have to always be humble in our approach to whatever we do in the world, to recognize that we are not the center of the universe. We being all of humanity, and also we being each and every one of us, is not the center of the universe. That's not how Judaism works. Judaism is not a narcissistic, individualistic religion. Okay, we're a part of a community. We're all dependent upon one another in the community. We need to look out for each other, and also we need to look out for the rest of creation too. We can't use creation willy-nilly for our personal use or for observing the holiday. Okay, verse 3. So these are the sacred occasions. What do we start with? We start with Shabbat. Verse 3 of chapter 23 on page 724. Sheshet yamim te'aseh melacha uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat Shabbaton mikra kodesh kol melacha lo ta'asu Shabbat hi ladonai b'chol moshvotechem. 6 days you can do work, and on the seventh day it is a Sabbath of Sabbaths, a holy proclamation, or a sacred occasion. It's translated here, but literally a holy proclamation. All work you cannot do. It is Shabbat to God in all of your dwelling places. So it's Shabbat for the whole community every seventh day. Okay, so this is just one of several times in the Torah we're commanded to keep Shabbat. Okay, don't do any work. That's a whole conversation another time about what work is and how do we define work. Okay, so that's Shabbat. That's the first sacred occasion. Verse 4, Eile moadei Adonai mikrei kodesh asher tikreu otam b'moadam. These are the holidays of God, or the sacred occasions of God, holy proclamations that you proclaim. It's reiterating again from what it says in verse 2, Verse 4 says again that you proclaim at their time, at their appointed time. Okay, so here are the holidays. You're going to proclaim them. All right, so we have a role. Again, it's reiterating what it said in verse 2. We have the role to proclaim the holiday. And so that's why the rabbis extensively define in the Mishnah and the Talmud how that was done. And what's the first holiday? B'chodesh harishon, in the first month, verse 5, ba'arba'a asar lachodesh, on the 14th day of the month, bein ha'arbayim, at twilight, Pesach ladonai, Pesach for God. So the 14th day at twilight is Pesach. That's the 14th day of the first month. This is what I said on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? So in the Torah, Passover occurs in the first month. In the Torah, which is more agriculturally based, right? So the Israelites in the land of Israel, Torah is taught to future farmers. That's essentially what all Israelites are going to be doing in Israel, farming the land. So you then work with an agricultural calendar. And the agricultural calendar in the Middle East is that planting is done in the springtime. And blooming happens around the springtime as well. So that is the beginning of the year. So the first month then makes sense in an agricultural based calendar, and Passover happens in the first month. It's only in the time of the rabbis that the calendar shifted, right? And there's debate among the rabbis as when the world was created. Was the world created in the month of Passover, or was the world created in the month of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot? So the majority opinion is the world was created in a time of what the Torah says is the seventh month. Okay, so it's kind of backward kind of reasoning, right? If Genesis, which came before Leviticus, you would think that the first month the world was created in the springtime. That's what you would think. But the rabbis are arguing, if we're making Rosh Hashanah now in what was the seventh month, and we're making that the first month, then we have to go back and fix when we think the world was created. So we have to say the world was created at this time too, and that what we're celebrating on Rosh Hashanah is commemorating the birthday of the world, right? And we say that after each time we blow the shofar in the repetition of the Amidah on Rosh Hashanah, Hayom Harat Olam. Today the world was conceived or created. Every time we blow the shofar, the three sections on Rosh Hashanah, we say that. So so the rabbis, and that's the one example of how the rabbis are saying we are declaring the holidays, and we're saying that this is how we're observing these holidays. So Passover. So we're keeping Passover as the 14th day of this month at twilight, but we're not going to call it the first month anymore. It says here it's the first month, but we rabbis are saying that's not the first month. The first month will be Tishrei when Rosh Hashanah is. Okay. Verse 5, we did verse 5. 6, Uvachamisha asar yom lachodesh hazeh chag hamatzot ladonai shivat yamim matzot tochelu. On the 15th and on the 15th day of this month, a matzah holiday to God. 7 days you shall eat matzah. So there are some scholars who suggest there's the Pesach holiday and there's the matzah holiday. So is Pesach and matzah holiday the same holiday? Well, for us, yes. But maybe in the time of the Torah, they were two separate holidays. Passover, right, to remember the 10th plague and how how the Israelites slaughtered the lamb, used the blood to spread on the doorposts so that God could pass over, Pesach could pass over the homes that had the blood on the doorposts. And then matzah, well, yeah, They baked the matzah in the desert as they were leaving Egypt. No time for the bread to rise. They're eating matzah. That becomes the matzah holiday. So perhaps there were originally two separate holidays that became intertwined as one holiday. Okay, so if the temple were still standing, we bring the Passover sacrifice on the 14th day in the afternoon, eat it as the holiday of matzah, Chag HaMatzot, starts at night when it becomes the 15th day. So for us, it's the whole same holiday. But I just want to point out, careful reading here, why it could be different. But 7 days, as opposed to us celebrating Passover for 8 days. Okay. 7. Bayom harishon mikra kodesh yelachem kol melechet avodah lo tasu. On the first day, a holy proclamation will be for you. All manner of work, melechet avodah. So labor work, you should not do. Again, the rabbis define what that means. 8, Vihi kravtem isher ladonai shivat yamim. You shall offer a burnt offering to God 7 days. Bayom hashvi'i, on the 7th day, mikra kodesh will be a holy proclamation. Kol melechet avodah lo tasu. All labor work you should not do. Okay, so this is the idea: first day of the holiday, last day of the holiday. First day, 7th day. For us, first 2 days, day 1, day 2, and then day 7, day 8. These are the Yom Tov, the Mikra Kodesh, those holy proclamation days where labor work should not be done. Okay, so that's where we get the idea of Yom Tov being like Shabbat. There's only 2 kinds of work we're allowed to do, the rabbis say, that on Yom Tov that we can't do on Shabbat. We're allowed to carry on Yom Tov, and we're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. Can't light a fire on Yom Tov like you can't on Shabbat, but you can keep a fire burning, you can fuel the fire, you can transfer a flame in order to cook on the Yom Tov, and you can carry on Yom Tov. So 2 types of work that you can do on Yom Tov that you can't do on Shabbat. Okay, verse 9, I want to get to the part about counting the Omer and Shavuot. So 9, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moses saying, Daber el bnei Israel v'amarta lahem, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, Ki tavo el haaretz. I'm on 726 now, the top of the page, verse 10 of chapter 23. Ki tavo el haaretz, when you enter the land, Asher ani noten lachem, that I am giving you, ukitzartem et kitzira, and you bring in the harvest, v'havetem et omer reshit kitzirchem el hakohen, and you bring an omer, which is a measure of grain, the first of the harvest, to the kohen. 11, v'henif et haomer lifnei Adonai lirtzonchem, and he will wave the Omer before God according to your will, kind of like to answer your prayer. Mimocharat HaShabbat yanifenu HaKohen. From the day after Shabbat, the Kohen will wave it. Va'asitem, 12, Va'asitem b'yom hanifchem et ha'omer keves tamim ben shnato la'olah l'Adonai. And you shall do on the day of the Omer waving a pure or innocent young lamb of a year old or less, a yearling lamb should be offered as an offering to God. All right, so when the Omer is waved the day after Shabbat, which Shabbat, this lamb would be offered as an offering. 13, umin chato shnei esronim solet. The meal offering should be 2 isarons, or 2/10 of a solet, belulav vashemen, immersed in oil, ishe ladonai, a burnt offering to God, reach nichoach, nice smelling, so it should be incense, venisko yayin, and there should be a wine libation of a revi'it hahin, of a quarter of a hin. We don't know how much that is, what that liquid weight is. All right, so you bring a lamb, you bring 2/10 of solet immersed in oil, soaked in oil, and a incense and wine libation. 14, velechem vekali vekarmel lo tochlu ad etzem hayom hazeh. And you shall eat no brain, no bread or parched grain or fresh ears until that day, ad haviachem et korban Elohechem, until this sacrifice, this offering, was brought to God. Chukat olam ledorotechem. This is a chok, an ordinance for all generations, for all time. B'chol moshrotechem, in all your places. So this idea, you can't eat bread until this omer of grain was waved and to God, right? So to celebrate the new harvest, this is how to celebrate the harvest. So nobody can make bread with the new harvest until this ceremony has taken place. This is the basis, and I don't know enough about this, but this is the basis for why there are some, when you buy baked goods from a kosher market, it will say yashan on it, meaning old grain, as opposed, it won't say chadash, it will say yashan. So it means that old, because this reflects new stuff can't be eaten until the offering was made. So you have to eat old stuff. So I'm not sure now, in this ultra-Orthodox world, and most of the grain products that we buy in kosher markets will say yashan on it. It will say pas yashan, okay? How they determine when grain has been harvested, and I believe it has to be grain harvested after the 16th day of Nisan, which is after the first day of Passover. So they're understanding the Shabbat here, and we'll end our discussion of the Torah portion here. They're understanding the after the Shabbat of when to bring the Omer is the first day of the holiday. It's not clear. Shabbat is Shabbat, right? Shabbat should be the 7th day. So it could be understood as after Shabbat during Passover. But the rabbis understand Shabbat here being the first day of the holiday, which then determines from verse 15 to verse 20 how to understand the holiday of Shavuot, when to count the 7 weeks until observing the holiday of Shavuot. So we don't have enough time to explain all of this, but just to say that the idea of new grain comes from this section right here, which is understood as on the day after the first day of Passover, the new grain, an omer of new grain, is offered in the temple in Jerusalem by the Kohen. Bread can't be made until that new grain is offered. And once that new grain is offered, then we can make bread ourselves from the new grain that we harvest. Okay, so the ordinance for all time is that we wait till after the first day of Passover to harvest our grain and to make challah and any other kind of baked products from that. Okay, it gets a little bit complicated, and again, it's kind of hard to observe this in a when the temple isn't standing in Jerusalem. We're not offering sacrifices anymore. Yes, Sumner.
I just got a little lost, so maybe I have to talk to you separately. When they're talking about, I thought we were talking about the new year, And then
Sure.
and then they're talking about Passover.
Right. I was going off on a tangent by saying the Passover in verse on page 725, verse 4.
Yeah,
No, verse 5, it says in the first month.
right.
Passover is observed in the first month. So I'm saying the rabbis are changing the calendar by saying that Rosh Hashanah, which we haven't gotten to yet, and we're not getting to today, it says in the seventh month, the first day of the seventh month is a day that of the shofar blast. So the rabbis took liberty with what is said here in this chapter by saying we're going to shift the calendar now and say that the first day of the seventh month is really now the first day of the first month. So that the rabbis, because the verse said that you proclaim, these are the holidays of God that you proclaim, that gave the rabbis the permission to recalibrate the calendar and re-understand all the holidays.
You proclaim equals you change.
Well, okay, yes,
Okay.
that's right. So the rabbis said that proclaim means that not just to say this is it, but we'll understand what's involved in observing this holiday, even by changing the calendar around. Right, I agree with you, Sumner. It's taking tremendous liberty, and it's just one example of many examples that the rabbis taking liberty with the Torah and understanding law as given in the Torah. So, um, I have I'm always no, it never ceases to amaze me how the rabbis granted themselves the authority to do this, and how the community went along with it. And the community didn't go along with it right away. The Kohanim, who were a separate faction at the time of the rabbis when the temple was standing, argued vehemently against the rabbis. How dare you change the Torah this way? How dare you reinterpret? No, no, no. We're the traditionalists. We're keeping the Torah this way. And when the temple was destroyed, the Kohanim lost their power base, right? So now there are no sacrifices to bring anymore because there's no temple anymore. So by default, the rabbis win. And the rabbis ensure that they win by making sure that everybody's doing it their way. So for 2,000 years, we've been doing it their way, and now we assume it's the only way. And some in the community think it was the original way, but it's not the original way. This was just the way that the rabbis came up to instill the idea that Judaism is an evolving religion and an evolving culture, and we have the right to continue making changes. Yes.
So, just so I understand, to confirm what you said, so this debate within the Jewish community really originated before the destruction of the temple.
Yes, absolutely. That's when it was a debate. The rabbis are saying, and it's not like they're becoming rabbis overnight. It's a segment of the community. We're not exactly sure when, but perhaps at the time of Hanukkah, around the time of the Hasmonean dynasty, maybe in the time of Ezra, a couple hundred years before that. We really don't know when the rabbinic community really started, where there were people who were studying the Torah and coming up with a method of interpretation. We really don't know when that first started. But by the time of the destruction of the temple, the rabbinic community was a strong segment and leaders, and they were leaders in the community, arguing for a system that can work with the temple and also independent of the temple. And really, if it wasn't for the rabbis, we wouldn't be here today as a Jewish community, right? If our religion was solely temple based and there's no temple, then that's it. That because of the rabbis, there was a system in place that they created that enabled the system to survive without the temple. So I have no problem following the rabbinic method and understanding and pointing out all the differences and the radical changes that they made. I just think it's important for us to understand the history behind these changes so that we understand, Passover, the way we do it today, always been done that way. Rosh Hashanah, the way we do it today, always been there. It's in the Torah too. Rosh Hashanah is not in the Torah. Rosh Hashanah is a rabbinic creation. And I have no problem doing that and saying that and observing it because it's 2,000 years old. It's not 3,000 years old, it's 2,000 years old, but still part of our Jewish tradition. All right, we'll stop here for today. We will continue our discussion next week. Next week, Torah study will be based on the Shmini Atzeret Torah reading, which will be the following Shabbat. So have a good rest of the week, everybody, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Absolutely.